If you own a gun in America, what I'm about to tell you in the next few minutes could be the difference between staying a law-abiding citizen and accidentally becoming a felon. The Supreme Court just dropped a unanimous decision that's sending shockwaves through every state in the nation, and gun owners everywhere are scrambling to understand what this means for their rights. Whether you've owned firearms for decades or just bought your first one last week, there are 10 critical things you need to know right now, and ignoring them could cost you everything. In a stunning turn of events that has left legal experts, gun rights advocates, and everyday Americans reeling, the Supreme Court of the United States 9-0 ruling that fundamentally reshapes how gun ownership works in this country. When all 9 justices agree on anything in today's polarized political climate, you know something massive just happened. This isn't a partisan issue anymore. This isn't about left versus right or red states versus blue states. This is about constitutional law, your Second Amendment rights, and the practical realities of owning a firearm in modern America. The implications of this decision are so far-reaching that millions of gun owners across the country may need to change how they store, transport, and use their firearms, and many don't even know it yet. The case that led to this historic ruling has been working its way through the courts for years, and it centers on fundamental questions about what the Second Amendment really means in practice. Does the right to keep and bear arms mean you can carry anywhere? Does it mean states can impose reasonable restrictions? Where exactly is the line between public safety and constitutional rights? For the first time in generations, we have crystal clear answers from the highest court in the land, and these answers are unanimous. Every single justice, regardless of who appointed them or what their judicial philosophy might be, agreed on the framework that will now govern gun laws across America. What makes this ruling so significant is that it doesn't just settle one narrow legal question. Instead, it establishes a comprehensive test that lower courts must use when evaluating any gun regulation. This means that gun laws in California, Texas, New York, Florida, and every other state will now be measured against the same constitutional standard. Some laws that have been on the books for years might not survive this scrutiny. Other regulations that gun rights groups have fought against for decades might actually be upheld. The landscape is changing, and if you own a gun, you need to understand these changes immediately. Let's start with the most important rule that every gun owner must understand right now. The Supreme Court has made it absolutely clear that the core right to keep a functional firearm in your home for self-defense is untouchable. This isn't new, but the court has now reinforced it with such strong language that any law attempting to prevent law-abiding citizens from having an operable gun in their home for protection is almost certainly unconstitutional. This means that laws requiring firearms to be stored in a way that makes them useless in an emergency, such as mandates for trigger locks that can't be quickly removed or requirements to store guns and ammunition in separate locked containers, are now on very shaky legal ground. The second critical thing you need to know is about concealed carry permits. The court has ruled that states cannot require applicants to prove a special need or exceptional circumstance to get a permit to carry a concealed weapon. If you meet the basic requirements, which typically include being a law-abiding adult without serious criminal history or mental health disqualifications, the state must issue you a permit. They can't make you jump through extra hoops or prove that you're in more danger than the average person. This effectively ends the discretionary permit systems that existed in several states, where local officials could deny permits based on subjective judgments about whether you really needed one. Third, and this is crucial for anyone who travels with firearms, the ruling clarifies that your right to bear arms doesn't evaporate the moment you step outside your front door. However, and this is a big however, the court also acknowledged that historically sensitive places can still prohibit firearms. This means that while states can't ban you from carrying in most public spaces, they can still enforce restrictions in places like schools, government buildings, and courthouses. The key is that these restrictions must be based on historical tradition. If there's no historical precedent for banning guns in a particular type of location, a modern ban probably won't hold up. The fourth thing every gun owner must know relates to firearm registration. The court's ruling reinforces that while the government can require you to undergo background checks when purchasing firearms from licensed dealers, there are limits to how much personal information states can demand about your gun ownership. Extensive registration schemes that would effectively create a database of every gun and its owner are now legally questionable, especially if they don't serve a clear public safety purpose that's rooted in historical practice. Fifth, the ruling addresses the types of firearms that can be regulated. The court has indicated that weapons in common use for lawful purposes are protected by the Second Amendment. This means that the most popular rifles, handguns, and shotguns in America cannot be banned outright. However, this doesn't mean all regulations on these firearms are unconstitutional. States can still impose reasonable requirements on sales, transfers, and in some cases, the features these guns can have, as long as these regulations align with historical tradition and don't amount to a de facto ban. The sixth critical point concerns ammunition. The court's framework suggests that while the right to keep and bear arms necessarily includes the right to obtain ammunition, states can regulate ammunition sales in ways similar to how they regulate firearm sales. This means background checks for ammunition purchases might be permissible, but outright bans on common types of ammunition or regulations that make it practically impossible to obtain ammunition would likely be struck down. Seventh, and this affects millions of gun owners, the ruling has implications for how states handle domestic violence situations and firearms. The court has indicated that laws prohibiting individuals under domestic violence restraining orders from possessing firearms are likely constitutional, especially when those restraining orders involve credible threats of violence. This aligns with historical traditions of disarming individuals who pose a demonstrated threat to others. If you're subject to such an order, you need to understand that your right to possess firearms may be temporarily suspended, and violating these restrictions carries serious federal penalties. The eighth thing you must know relates to age restrictions. The court's framework suggests that laws setting a minimum age for firearm purchases are probably constitutional, as there's substantial historical precedent for treating minors differently regarding access to weapons. However, the specific age limits and how they're applied matter. Setting the age at 21 for all firearms might face legal challenges, while restrictions on minors under 18 are on firmer legal ground based on historical practice. Ninth, this ruling clarifies that states can require firearms training or safety courses as a condition for obtaining a carry permit, as long as these requirements aren't so burdensome that they effectively prevent people from exercising their rights, and as long as they serve legitimate public safety purpose with some historical grounding, they'll likely withstand legal challenges. This means if you're planning to carry a concealed weapon, be prepared to demonstrate basic competency and safety knowledge. The 10th and final critical thing every gun owner needs to understand is about enforcement and penalties. The court's ruling doesn't change the fact that violating gun laws, even ones that might eventually be found unconstitutional, can result in serious criminal penalties while those laws are still on the books. You cannot simply ignore laws you think are unconstitutional based on this ruling. The proper course is to either comply with existing laws or legally challenge them through the court system. Taking the law into your own hands by ignoring regulations you disagree with will result in prosecution, and claiming you thought a law was unconstitutional is not a valid defense. This Supreme Court decision represents a watershed moment in American jurisprudence regarding the Second Amendment. For gun owners, it provides both expanded protections and clearer guidelines about what regulations are permissible. The key takeaway is that the right to keep and bear arms is firmly protected, but it's not unlimited. Reasonable regulations rooted in historical tradition will continue to exist, and gun owners must navigate these laws carefully. Stay informed about how your state is responding to this ruling. Consult with legal experts if you have questions about specific situations, and always prioritize both your rights and your responsibilities as a gun owner. The legal landscape is still evolving as lower courts apply this new framework, so what's permissible today might be clarified further tomorrow. Your best protection is knowledge, and now you have the essential information you need to stay on the right side of the law while fully exercising your constitutional rights. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.